Oh, my name is Mike Feighny. My first connection with Yongsan was I came to Korea in 1974. I was a captain in a Judge Advocate General's Corps, and I was stationed at Yongsan. I was in what is now the JAG office, and I was there from June of 74 till July of 75. And I was primarily a defense counsel, and then I became a prosecutor. So I spent 1 year, that time, 74, 75. I lived in a BOQ, building 4095, which is across the street from where the Dragon Hill is, where the current ACS building is. I guess what I remember about that time is we used to go have lunch, and we could, there weren't that many private automobiles, so you could, and I did not have a car during that time, so we would take Korean taxis or PX taxis, and we would go downtown to restaurants and eat and come back, and we could do all that in an hour. The traffic wasn't nearly as bad as it is now. I think at that time, most Koreans did not have automobile. And then I left in 75, and I came back to Korea in 1982. And at that time, I was a lieutenant colonel, still in the JAG Corps. So I was the chief of administrative law at U.S. Forces Korea over here in the JAG office. So we gave legal opinions on a lot of the administrative law issues facing the command. Okay, I got married in 1983, and my daughter was born, and so my youngest daughter in 1984. We were living over here at the Riverside apartment, and there was a little hospital over there, so born there. Yeah. So I was here 82 to 84, and then in 87, we came back to Korea. At that time, I was the chief counsel at the Korea Contracting Agency. It later became the Contracting Command Korea, CCK, and it's now called the 411th Contract Support Brigade, and it was over at Camp, I want to say Camp Gray. It's right across from Camp Kim, where the USO is, right across the street from there. It's on I think now the embassy owns that compound. Yeah. So we were over there, and at that time, my wife was running a modeling agency. So 87 to 91, I was at the Contracting Command Korea, and I retired from the Army in 89. I stayed there as a civilian lawyer, and then in 91, I took a job as a district counsel for the Far East District Corps of Engineers. So, and of course, their compound is in Dongdaemun. And that compound is still there. Worked there for 15 years. I worked there from 1991 to 1995. And then I went to Pacific Ocean Division for the Corps of Engineers in Hawaii at Fort Shafter. And I was there for 10 years. And then my wife asked me if we could come back to Korea, and I said yes, but only for 2 years. So we came back for 2 years, and we stayed here for 10. And then I retired in 2015, and we moved back to Hawaii, so we live in Hawaii now. One thing I want to say is it was, I feel very honored and privileged that I was able to serve, first in the U.S. Army for 25 years, then 26 years as an Army civilian, but I spent 20 years in Korea. And I also, when I was in Vietnam, I was next to a Korean unit. In fact, it was the 1st Capital Division. That was my first dealings with Koreans because my neighbor in Vietnam had fought in the Korean War. And so he and I used to go to the Korean Officers Club, and we would drink Crown beer, and that's where I was introduced to kimchi. Yeah. So, and as I said, I worked here for 20 years, and my experiences with Korean people's always been, wonderful. What I admire about Korean culture is their first family values, second respect for education. Of course, the other thing is the work ethic. The Korean people always work so hard, and I've worked with the Korean engineers and in the Far East District, that organization, it's about 2/3 Korean nationals. Of the remaining 1/3, probably half of those are Korean Americans. So, I've enjoyed very much working here, and we have many Korean friends. Starting in 1991, I worked for the Army Corps of Engineers, and I worked 4 years here as a district council. And then I came back here as a district council for 10 years. So, and one thing, the Army and the Army Corps of Engineers provided so much engineering expertise to the Koreans. So a lot of the expertise that the Korean construction companies has, they developed that working with the Corps of Engineers. The Corps of Engineers had these huge projects in Saudi Arabia, and the construction companies, primarily Korean construction companies. In Vietnam, you had Korean construction companies over there working. So, yeah, and of course the Koreans have gone with the U.S. through these wars in Iraq, Afghanistan. The Koreans, they've I know many Korean officers who have served over there. So, I really, I have a tremendous respect for the Korean people. When the U.S. Army or the U.S. military goes somewhere, the first thing they do is establish a status force agreement, because they want U.S. troops who commit crimes. They basically they don't want to turn them over to local courts or local criminal jurisdiction. Now, in Korea, the status force agreement has been modified substantially. Yeah, in fact, I do a lot of work on the status force agreement. One other thing the status force agreement provides is that when we're doing construction, like the Corps of Engineers, when we have to give a preference to Korean construction contractors. Now, if it involves classified work, then we have to have a U.S. firm. Part of the Yongsan relocation to Humphreys are buildings down there. Some of those buildings have classified facilities. So the classified portion, you'll have to bring in a U.S. contractor. The unclassified portion, we have our Korean construction contractors. So and believe me, it can get very complicated as to who's doing what. First of all, SOFA granted land, that is not the same as a embassy land. The embassy housing over here, see, that can be considered U.S. territory. But this area is not. It's SOFA granted land, and when the U.S. no longer uses it for military service, we have to turn it back to the Korean government. Like the Far East District compound, it's actually owned by some education entity. When the U.S. leaves the FED compound, they'll return that property back. And my understanding is it's going to go to the Ministry of Education. And another provision about the status force agreement is we turn this property back as is. Okay, it's part of why we're leaving here, is because the Korean government does not want a foreign army, stationed in the middle of their capital. And you can certainly understand that. What used to be called the back bar of the 8th Army Officers Club, it became Harveys. Yeah, we used to go to Harveys on Friday night, and they used to have Filipino bands there. Yeah, nice. But in the old days, the back bar of the 8th Army Officers Club, it was that's where people would, if they'd been out drinking in Itaewon, they would come and go there for another drink. And, oh yeah, I know Mama Kim, yeah. Black marketing was a big problem here. There were a lot of people that got in trouble. Yeah, well, first of all, I question whether it'll be turned into a park. But second, I understand why this is happening, but it still makes me sad because I have, 20 years of my life here. And really, when I come back to Korea, I'm coming home.